Noah Roberts didn't lose his marriage first. He lost his name. It happened in a glass-walled boardroom where everyone pretended to be professional while quietly enjoying the spectacle. His security badge was deactivated mid-meeting. A quiet red light. A polite request to step outside. Emily, his wife, didn't look at him when it happened. Jason Miller did. He smiled just enough to make it hurt. They called Noah non-essential. They called his contribution replaceable. And when a gray-haired woman at the far end of the table spoke up softly, calmly, they laughed and dismissed her as well. Just an old woman who didn't belong there. Noah stood frozen, holding a box of personal items, realizing that the life he had defended with loyalty and silence had already moved on without him. What he didn't know, what no one in that room understood, was that this humiliation wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning, and the woman they ignored was the only one who could change everything. Before you leave, stay with this story. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly, but when it does, it's worth witnessing. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you believe dignity matters more than dominance, consider subscribing. Noah Roberts had never thought of himself as a small man. But over the years, his marriage had quietly trained him to feel like one. He worked in operations systems coordination, internal infrastructure, the invisible framework that kept companies from collapsing when ambition ran faster than reality. It wasn't glamorous work. There were no applause-filled presentations or glossy magazine features. But it was honest, precise, and necessary. Noah liked things that worked quietly. He liked solving problems before they announced themselves. Emily hadn't always resented that about him. When they first met, she admired his steadiness. While she chased momentum networking events, late-night pitches, bold career moves, Noah was the constant. He cooked. He listened. He remembered details. He believed in her long before others did, sometimes more than she believed in herself. When she took risks, he absorbed the uncertainty without complaint. But admiration, Noah would later learn, has an expiration date when success enters the room. Emily's career accelerated fast. A mid-level management role turned into a senior position almost overnight after a strategic merger. Her schedule filled with dinners Noah wasn't invited to and meetings that stretched long past midnight. At first, he didn't question it. Ambition required sacrifice. He knew that. He supported it. What he didn't notice, at least not right away, was how the language between them changed. "You wouldn't understand," replaced. "Let me explain. This is complicated," replaced. "What do you think?" And eventually, "I've already handled it," replaced conversation entirely. Money was the first line Noah felt himself pushed behind. Emily suggested consolidating accounts for efficiency. It made sense. She was dealing with larger figures now, complex compensation structures, stock options Noah had never needed to think about. He agreed. Trust, after all, was supposed to simplify things, not complicate them. But slowly, without ceremony, access disappeared. He no longer saw statements unless he asked. Joint decisions became notifications. When he suggested adjustments, budgeting, long-term planning, Emily waved them away with a patience that felt rehearsed. She spoke to him like a junior colleague who meant well but didn't quite grasp the scope of the project. Noah told himself this was temporary, that marriages went through seasons, that love didn't always look like attention. Still, there were moments that unsettled him. Emily started locking her phone, something she had never done before. She took calls in the garage, pacing in circles, lowering her voice when Noah entered the room. Once late at night, he woke to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through emails with an intensity that felt personal, almost secretive. When he asked if everything was okay, she smiled without warmth. "Just work," she said. "You don't need to worry." That sentence stayed with him longer than it should have. Because Noah did worry. Not in a dramatic way, not with accusations or confrontations. His concern was quieter, more structural. He sensed imbalance, the kind that precedes collapse. A system under stress doesn't fail all at once. It gives signals, data points, minor errors no one wants to investigate. And Noah was trained to notice those. The first clear signal came during a dinner he hadn't known was important. Emily mentioned Jason Miller casually, the way someone mentions a colleague who's been around long enough to feel inevitable. The CEO, visionary, aggressive, brilliant according to everyone who admired success more than integrity. Noah had heard the name before, usually paired with phrases like game changer or once-in-a-generation leader. That night, Emily spoke about him differently, not with awe, but with familiarity. She quoted him, mimicked his phrasing, defended his decisions before Noah could even ask a question. When Noah pointed out a potential operational flaw in a strategy, Jason had proposed something that could create long-term risk. Emily's response was sharp. Jason's already thought of that, she said. He sees the bigger picture. The way she said his name bothered Noah more than the words themselves. Over the following weeks, Jason appeared more often in conversation than in absence. Emily's schedule aligned suspiciously with his. Travel that overlapped, conferences that extended, meetings that ran late, always justified, always urgent. Noah didn't accuse. He observed. One evening, while Emily showered, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Noah wasn't looking for it. He hadn't planned to check. But the screen lit up with a preview before it went dark again. We need to be careful. Not yet. The message vanished before he could read more. Noah stood still, hand resting on the counter, heart beating slower than expected. He didn't feel rage. He didn't feel shock. What he felt was alignment pieces clicking into a pattern he hadn't wanted to name. That night, he didn't say anything. He waited. Waiting had always been his strength. Days later, another anomaly surfaced, this one purely professional. Emily left her laptop open on the dining table while rushing out for a call. Noah noticed a spreadsheet minimized on the screen, its title partially visible. It wasn't a document he recognized, but the formatting caught his attention. Operational summaries, capital flow projections, external investment references. Curious, he glanced not to snoop but to understand. One line stood out. A funding source listed under a holding entity with a name that felt oddly familiar. He couldn't place it immediately, but something about it pulled at his memory. A phrase his mother Evelyn had once used when explaining why she avoided banks she didn't trust. A name she had dismissed years ago with a quiet, knowing smile. Noah closed the laptop. He didn't need more confirmation, not yet. He needed context, perspective, ground truth. That evening, he called his mother. Evelyn answered on the second ring, her voice calm as always. They spoke about small things at first, the weather, a neighbor, a book she was rereading. Then gently, Noah asked how she was feeling lately. I'm well, she said, busy in my own way. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just measured. And how is Emily's company doing? Evelyn asked, her tone neutral, almost casual. Noah hesitated. It's growing, he said, fast. Growth can be good, Evelyn replied. Or it can hide cracks. Noah felt a chill run through him. They ended the call soon after. Nothing dramatic, nothing revealing. But when Noah set his phone down, he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to accept before. His marriage was no longer a partnership. It was a structure he was being quietly removed from. And structures don't collapse out of malice. They collapse because someone decided they were no longer worth maintaining. As you think about Noah's silence, ask yourself this: when loyalty is mistaken for weakness, is patience still a virtue or a warning sign? If Noah Roberts had learned anything from years of working behind the scenes, it was this: power rarely announces itself. It insinuates. Emily didn't wake up one morning and decide to leave him behind. The shift had been gradual, almost elegant in its precision. It started with small reallocations of attention, an extra hour at work, a dinner rescheduled, a conversation shortened because something urgent had come up. Noah adjusted. He always did. But adjustment, when unreciprocated, becomes erosion. The marriage began to feel less like a shared life and more like a transaction with unspoken terms. Emily spoke often about leverage now: professional leverage, social leverage, timing leverage. Words Noah recognized from boardrooms, not bedrooms. She analyzed people the way she used to analyze markets: who was useful, who was slowing momentum, who needed to be managed rather than trusted. Jason Miller's influence was everywhere, even when he wasn't physically present. Emily quoted him with increasing frequency, often without realizing it. She adopted his cadence, his dismissive confidence, his belief that speed justified risk. When Noah expressed concern carefully, respectfully, she responded with impatience that bordered on contempt. "You're thinking too small," she told him once, not unkindly but decisively. "That's not how things work at this level. This level." The phrase landed harder than she intended. Noah understood ambition. He respected it. What unsettled him was how easily Emily had accepted a new hierarchy, one in which proximity to power mattered more than loyalty and outcomes mattered more than process. The values she once shared with him, transparency, fairness, restraint, hadn't been rejected outright. They'd simply been deprioritized. And in their place stood Jason. Noah met him for the first time at a company reception, an event Emily insisted Noah attend to be supportive. Jason was exactly as advertised: charismatic, articulate, and disarmingly attentive. He shook Noah's hand, firmly held eye contact, just long enough to establish dominance without appearing aggressive. "I've heard a lot about you," Jason said, smiling. "Emily tells me you keep things running smoothly." It sounded like a compliment. It felt like a classification. Throughout the evening, Noah watched how people gravitated toward Jason, how conversations shifted when he entered a room, how laughter followed his cues. Emily stayed close to him, mirroring his movements, anticipating his needs. At one point, Jason leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Emily laughed softly, touching his arm without thinking. Noah noticed. He always noticed. Later that night, driving home in silence, Noah asked a question he had rehearsed carefully. "Are you happy?" he said. Emily exhaled as if the question itself were a burden. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" "You just seem different," Noah replied. "Distracted." Emily stared out the window. "I'm focused," she corrected. "There's a difference." That was the moment Noah understood that the language between them had fully diverged. Where he spoke of connection, Emily spoke of optimization. Where he valued continuity, she valued acceleration. A week later, the financial shift became explicit. Emily announced over breakfast that she had restructured their remaining joint assets. Retirement contributions, savings, long-term investments, all moved into vehicles she described as strategically aligned. She slid a document across the table, already signed. "I need you to sign this," she said, not looking up from her phone. Noah scanned the pages. The language was dense but deliberate. It reduced his authority to a formality, his consent to a checkbox. "This changes a lot," he said quietly. "It simplifies things," Emily replied. "Trust me." Trust, again. Noah didn't sign immediately. He asked for time. Emily's irritation flared, brief but unmistakable. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "Jason's lawyers use this structure all the time. It's standard. Jason's lawyers." Noah set the papers down. "I'll review it," he said. That night, Emily didn't come home until after midnight. The confirmation he'd been avoiding arrived soon after, not in the form of a confession, but a pattern too consistent to ignore. Emily's absences aligned precisely with Jason's travel schedule. Messages were deleted. Calls were taken behind closed doors. When Noah entered a room, unexpectedly conversations stopped. Marriage was no longer eroding. It was being repurposed. The moment that removed all doubt came quietly, without drama. Noah was at home late one afternoon when Emily returned, unexpectedly flustered. She rushed past him, phone pressed to her ear, voice lowered. "No, not now," she said. "He's here." She froze when she realized Noah was standing in the hallway. For a fraction of a second, her composure slipped. "Who were you talking to?" Noah asked. Emily recovered quickly. "Work," she said. "This isn't a good time." But it was the wrong answer. Not because it was false, Noah had already accepted that, but because it was insufficient, it assumed he no longer required honesty, that he had been reclassified from partner to obstacle. That evening, while Emily showered, Noah sat alone at the dining table staring at nothing. Her laptop lay open beside him. He hadn't touched it. He didn't need to. But then a notification appeared, an email preview briefly visible before the screen dimmed. "We can't rush this after the acquisition is finalized." The sender's name wasn't saved, but Noah knew who it was. He didn't read further. He closed the laptop and stood up, heart-steady, thoughts unusually clear. The emotional storm he had expected never came. In its place was something colder, more focused, understanding. Later that night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Noah opened the financial documents he'd been collecting mentally for weeks. He reviewed patterns, traced timelines, connected behaviors to incentives. The affair wasn't just personal. It was strategic. Emily's alignment with Jason extended beyond emotion into finance, governance, and control. And that's when Noah noticed the second anomaly. Buried deep in a report Emily had carelessly left accessible was a funding reference, an external holding entity, with a name that stirred something in him. He couldn't place it immediately, but it felt familiar in a way that went beyond recognition. It felt inherited. He wrote it down. The next morning, Noah called his mother again. Evelyn answered, as she always did, unhurried. "Mom," Noah said, "can I ask you something strange?" She paused. "You already have." He told her the name. There was silence on the line. Not confusion, not surprise. Recognition. "That's interesting," Evelyn said finally. "Where did you see it?" Noah explained, choosing his words carefully. When he finished, Evelyn didn't ask questions. She didn't offer reassurance. She simply said, "Thank you for telling me." "Does it mean something?" Noah asked. "Yes," she replied. "But not in the way you think." They ended the call soon after. Noah sat alone in his car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, aware that something fundamental had shifted. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was systemic. His marriage hadn't failed. It had been leveraged. And somewhere beyond his line of sight, forces were already moving. As you reflect on Noah's restraint, consider this: when love becomes a transaction, who decides the price and who pays it in full? The name wouldn't leave Noah Roberts alone. He carried it with him through the following days, replaying it in his mind, the way one worries a loose thread, unsure whether pulling would unravel everything, or finally make sense of the fabric. It appeared nowhere obvious. No headlines, no press releases, no flashy digital footprint. And yet it sat there in Emily's company reports with quiet confidence, as if it didn't need explanation. That unsettled him more than if it had been famous. Noah approached the question the only way he knew how, methodically. He didn't dig through Emily's files. He didn't hack accounts or cross boundaries. Instead, he reconstructed what he already knew. Timelines, decisions, capital inflows that coincided too neatly with Jason Miller's rise in influence. Strategic pivots that felt less like innovation and more like preparation for something larger, something imminent. A company doesn't reorganize that quickly unless it's being positioned. One evening, Noah sat alone at the kitchen table, notebook, open pen resting in his hand. He wrote the name again, then circled it. Beneath it, he listed everything that didn't add up. The speed of expansion. The confidence Jason displayed long before deals were finalized. The way Emily spoke, as if outcomes were already guaranteed. Certainty without confirmation was either genius or inside knowledge. Noah remembered something his mother once told him years ago, when he was still learning the difference between risk and recklessness. Real power, Evelyn had said, doesn't chase attention. It removes uncertainty. At the time, he'd thought it was just an observation. Now, it felt like a warning. The next signal came from an unexpected place. Emily invited him to dinner. Not a rushed meal eaten between calls, but a reservation downtown, expensive, carefully chosen. She dressed differently that night. Softer, warmer. The version of her that used to belong to their early years together. Noah noticed the performance immediately. Over wine, Emily spoke about the future, about after things settle, about opportunities opening up once certain transitions were complete. She talked about vacations they might take, homes they could consider. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently. "I don't want you to feel shut out." The words were right. The timing was wrong. Noah smiled just enough to keep the evening intact. "I know you're under pressure," he said. "I trust you." Emily relaxed. The tension in her shoulders eased. That Noah realized was the transaction. Reassurance in exchange for silence. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Emily fell asleep quickly. Noah did not. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, aware that trust, real trust, doesn't require negotiation. The following morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He visited his mother unannounced. Evelyn Roberts lived in the same modest house Noah had grown up, in a place that reflected restraint rather than nostalgia. No renovations, no visible upgrades. Everything functional, well-maintained, quietly deliberate. She greeted him with a calm smile, as if she'd been expecting him without knowing why. They sat in the kitchen with coffee. Sunlight filtered in through the window, illuminating a space untouched by urgency. "You're thinking too much," Evelyn said after a while. Noah blinked. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't need to," she replied. "You have that look. The one you had when you were a child, and realized adults weren't telling you the full story." Noah hesitated. Then he spoke. He told her about the company, the restructuring, Jason Miller, Emily's distance. He mentioned the name again, carefully watching her face this time. Evelyn didn't react, not visibly, but she did something Noah recognized. She folded her hands together, a habit she reserved for moments requiring precision. "That name," she said slowly, "has a history." "With you," Noah asked, "with the kind of work people don't brag about?" Evelyn replied, "And the kind of mistakes that teach patience." Noah leaned forward. "What does it have to do with Emily's company?" Evelyn met his gaze. "That depends on what they think they're buying." Noah felt a tightness in his chest. Buying, Evelyn stood and walked to the counter, pouring more coffee. "Noah," she said evenly, "if a company grows faster than its foundations, it's because someone believes they can control the landing. Can you?" Noah asked quietly. Evelyn turned back to him, eyes steady. "I can ask questions." That was all she said. Noah left feeling both reassured and unsettled. His mother hadn't denied anything. She hadn't confirmed anything either. But the implication was clear. Forces were already in motion, and they were not emotional ones. Back home, Emily's behavior intensified. Her phone never left her side. Meetings multiplied. She began speaking openly about Jason's vision, praising his leadership in front of others, with a familiarity that bordered on intimacy. At a social gathering, she corrected Noah mid-sentence, laughing lightly as if to soften the humiliation. "You're not in that loop anymore," she said. "It's fine. It wasn't fine." But Noah didn't argue. He began preparing not for confrontation, but for impact. He documented what he could without invading privacy. Dates, statements, financial shifts. Emily mentioned casually, unaware of how precisely Noah tracked inconsistencies. He wasn't building a case. He was building clarity. The final confirmation came days later, in a way so subtle it almost escaped notice. Emily left her laptop open again, a habit born of overconfidence. Noah glanced at the screen just as an internal memo popped up, subject line, visible, nothing more. Acquisition timeline. Final phase. His pulse didn't spike. It steadied. The memo disappeared quickly, but Noah had seen enough. This wasn't speculation anymore. The company wasn't just growing. It was being prepared for purchase. And Emily, his wife, was acting like someone who believed she would emerge on the winning side of a deal already decided. That evening, Noah called his lawyer not to initiate anything, but to ask questions. Hypotheticals. What protections existed? What silence cost? What happened when spouses aligned financially against each other? The answers were measured, cautious. But one sentence stayed with him. People who move early rarely feel the ground shift, the lawyer said. They assume they're causing it. That night, Noah sat alone in the dark, the house unnaturally quiet. He thought about loyalty, about patience, about how easily kindness could be mistaken for compliance. He didn't feel angry. He felt awake. And somewhere not far away, a woman everyone underestimated was deciding when to stop asking questions and start finalizing answers. As you consider Noah's restraint, ask yourself this. When the truth arrives quietly, do you recognize it or dismiss it because it doesn't shout? Evelyn Roberts had spent most of her life mastering the art of being underestimated. It wasn't an act she put on deliberately in the beginning. It simply evolved, first out of necessity, later out of preference. After her husband passed away, people expected grief to soften her, to make her smaller. Instead, it refined her. She learned quickly that when others assumed you were harmless, they spoke more freely. When they dismissed you as irrelevant, they stopped guarding the truth. And truth Evelyn knew was always more valuable than noise. To Noah, she'd always been just his mother. Quiet, disciplined, careful with money in a way that bordered on stubborn. She clipped coupons long after she no longer needed to. She drove the same car for over a decade. When Noah asked her once why she never traveled, she had smiled faintly and said, "I've already seen enough." He never questioned it. Why would he? Children rarely imagine their parents as anything other than what they are allowed to see. But Evelyn's life before widowhood and long before Noah's adulthood had unfolded in rooms where silence carried weight. She had learned finance not from textbooks, but from patterns, from watching how markets reacted when confidence evaporated, from understanding how capital moved when fear entered the equation. She had learned one lesson above all others: visibility was optional, control was not. When Noah left her house that morning, she stood at the kitchen window and watched his car disappear down the street. She didn't sigh. She didn't pace. Emotion had never interfered with her timing. She turned, walked down the narrow hallway, and entered the small home office she rarely used. Inside, the room looked unremarkable. An old desk, neatly stacked files, a single laptop. But appearances had never been Evelyn's priority. She sat down, opened the laptop, and logged into a system Noah didn't know existed. Within seconds, she was reviewing reports. Not Emily's company directly, that would have been premature, but the entities circling it. The quiet movements, the advisory firms, the shell holdings designed to confuse anyone looking too closely. Evelyn recognized the architecture immediately. It was ambitious, aggressive, and poorly disguised by people who believed speed could compensate for experience. Jason Miller's fingerprints were everywhere. She read slowly, cross-referencing dates, tracing capital pathways the way one follows river currents back to their source. The name Noah had mentioned appeared again exactly where she expected it to. Evelyn closed the file and leaned back in her chair. So they were moving faster than she'd thought. Her phone rang. Daniel Brooks. "I assume Noah spoke to you," she said before he could greet her. "He did," Daniel replied, carefully. "He's trying not to make assumptions." "That's good," Evelyn said. "Assumptions make people loud." Daniel hesitated. "Do you want me to intervene?" "Not yet," she said. "I'm still observing." "You're aware they're positioning for a full acquisition," Daniel added. "Yes," Evelyn replied calmly. "And they believe they control the narrative." She ended the call and returned her attention to the screen. Across town, Emily Roberts was operating under a very different assumption. She had convinced herself that discretion equaled intelligence, that secrecy meant strategy. Jason reinforced that belief at every opportunity, praising her instincts, framing their alignment as inevitability rather than choice. "They don't see it coming," he told her one afternoon, pouring wine in his office as if celebrating prematurely was part of the plan. That's the advantage. Emily believed him, or perhaps she needed to. Her marriage to Noah had become something she compartmentalized, an inconvenient remnant of a slower life. She told herself that Noah would eventually understand, that he would benefit indirectly from her success, that what she was doing wasn't betrayal, but evolution. Still, there were moments brief intrusive when doubt surfaced. Like when she saw Evelyn at the company once seated quietly in the lobby, waiting patiently while assistants walked past without acknowledgement. Emily had felt a flicker of irritation, and a sense that the woman didn't belong in that space. What is she even doing here? Emily had whispered to Jason. Jason had glanced briefly and shrugged. Probably lost. Emily laughed. She didn't know how much that moment would cost her. Evelyn returned to the office 2 days later, not to observe but to confirm. She introduced herself to the receptionist, politely requested a visitor badge, and waited. The atmosphere around her buzzed with urgency, the sound of people chasing relevance. No one recognized her name. No one connected it to anything that mattered. That was confirmed when an assistant finally approached her eyes, flicking dismissively over Evelyn's modest attire. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "I'm here to review a transaction," Evelyn replied gently. The assistant blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" Evelyn smiled. "Not with you." It took exactly 12 minutes for someone more senior to arrive, confusion evident on his face as he reviewed the documentation Evelyn provided. His posture changed mid-sentence. His voice softened. His questions became careful. Evelyn watched the shift without satisfaction. Power didn't need applause. By the time she left the building, she had everything she needed. Confirmation of intent. Timelines. Names of decision-makers who believed they were invisible. That evening, she met Daniel Brooks in person. "They're overextended," she said, handing him a folder. "And they're counting on momentum to carry them through." Daniel skimmed the contents, eyebrows lifting. "This is comprehensive." "They underestimated the wrong variable," Evelyn replied. "They assumed I wouldn't be paying attention." "What would you like to do?" Daniel asked. Evelyn considered the question carefully. "I'd like to let them continue," she said. "People reveal the most when they think they've already won." Meanwhile, Noah was reaching the limits of silence. Emily's behavior had grown bolder. She no longer hid her alignment with Jason. She spoke of Noah in the third person when he wasn't in the room, and sometimes when he was. At a dinner with colleagues, she joked about supportive spouses who know when to step back, glancing at Noah with a smile that felt practiced. Noah smiled back. He had stopped expecting respect from her. What he was guarding now was something else entirely, his sense of self. One evening, he received an email from Emily's legal team. Not about divorce yet, but about asset clarification. The tone was clinical, rehearsed. It framed changes as necessary, inevitable. Noah forwarded the email to Daniel Brooks without comment. Daniel replied with a single line, "We're prepared." That was the first time Noah felt truly grounded in weeks. He drove to his mother's house again that night. Evelyn answered the door and studied his face for a moment before stepping aside. "You're reaching the end of your patience," she said. "Yes," Noah replied. "But I don't want to lose myself," Evelyn nodded. "You won't. But you need to understand something." She led him to the living room, gesturing for him to sit. "People like Jason and Emily believe power comes from taking," she said. "From positioning themselves above others. They think winning requires someone else to lose." She paused. "Real power," she continued, "comes from letting people expose themselves legally, publicly, and permanently." Noah absorbed the words slowly. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Evelyn met his gaze. "Nothing," she said, "except trust." For the first time in weeks, Noah felt something loosen in his chest. He didn't know what his mother was capable of, not fully. But he understood this much: she wasn't reacting. She was waiting. And the people who thought they were untouchable were walking willingly toward a conclusion they hadn't accounted for. As you reflect on Evelyn's restraint, consider this: when someone chooses silence over reaction, are they powerless or simply choosing the moment that will matter most? The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, written in the kind of language that pretended neutrality while delivering judgment. Mandatory attendance. Final internal review. Noah Roberts read it twice, not because he didn't understand, but because he recognized what it was. A formality designed to look procedural, a stage prepared for something already decided. Emily didn't mention the meeting until that evening. "Oh, there's a review tomorrow," she said casually, scrolling through her phone. "It shouldn't take long. Should I prepare anything?" Noah asked. She hesitated just a fraction of a second. "No, they'll handle it. They." The next morning, Noah dressed the way he always did for work, clean, simple, unobtrusive. He arrived early not to make a statement, but because punctuality was one of the few habits he refused to surrender. The building felt different that day. Too quiet, like a space waiting to exhale. Inside the boardroom, the seats filled quickly. Executives. Legal counsel. Jason Miller, at the head of the table, relaxed, confident, already in possession of the room. Emily sat to his right, posture straight, expression composed. She didn't look at Noah when he entered. At the far end of the table, a single chair remained empty. Noah took a seat halfway down, nodding politely to people who avoided meeting his eyes. He felt oddly detached, as if watching a process unfold rather than participating in it. That detachment steadied him. Jason opened the meeting with practiced ease. "We're here to align the company's structure with its future," he said. "That requires clarity." The word clarity was doing heavy work. A lawyer began speaking next, outlining adjustments to roles and responsibilities. The language was technical, carefully insulated from emotion. When Noah's name came up, it was framed as a redundancy, not a failure, not a dismissal, simply an inefficiency. Non-essential to forward operations, the lawyer said. Noah felt the phrase land dull and cold. Emily shifted slightly, but said nothing. A folder was slid across the table toward Noah. Inside were documents already signed by multiple parties. The implication was clear. His signature was the last obstacle. "This is standard," Jason said, finally turning to him. "Nothing personal." Noah looked up. "Then why does it feel rehearsed?" A flicker of irritation crossed Jason's face, quickly masked. Emily sighed, as if Noah were exhausting her. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Noah studied her. The woman in front of him looked like Emily, sounded like her, but the familiarity stopped there. This version spoke with certainty, borrowed from proximity to power, not conviction. He closed the folder. "I'm not signing this today," he said calmly. The room shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Jason leaned back in his chair. "That won't change the outcome." "No," Noah replied. "But it will change how I participate in it." Silence followed. Then the door opened. Evelyn Roberts entered the room without announcement. She wore a plain gray coat, her posture straight, her movements unhurried. No one recognized her immediately. A few glanced up, confused irritation flickering at the interruption. "Excuse me," Jason said. "This is a closed meeting." Evelyn didn't respond to him. She walked to the empty chair at the end of the table and sat down, placing a slim folder in front of her. "I'll only be a moment," she said softly. Jason frowned. "And you are?" Evelyn looked at him, then her expression neutral. "Someone who asked for a copy of the acquisition agreement," she replied. A lawyer near Jason stiffened. "That document isn't public." "No," Evelyn agreed. "But it is transferable." Emily finally turned recognition, dawning too late. Her face tightened. "What is she doing here?" Emily asked sharply. Evelyn glanced at her, not with anger, not with triumph, but with something closer to curiosity. "Listening," she said. "The same thing I've been doing for a while now." Jason stood. "This is inappropriate." Evelyn opened her folder. "So is misrepresenting material risk to minority stakeholders." The room went still. She slid a document across the table, not toward Jason, but toward the legal counsel. "You'll want to review that," she said. "It outlines discrepancies between projected and actual capital flows over the last 2 quarters. The lawyer's eyes moved quickly as he read. His posture changed. Jason's confidence wavered. "This meeting isn't about, it's about accountability," Evelyn said gently. "Whether you intended it to be or not." Emily's voice rose. "You don't belong here." Evelyn turned to her fully now. "You're right," she said. "I don't belong in rooms where people mistake momentum for immunity." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. Jason tried to regain control. "Who authorized you to be here?" Evelyn folded her hands. The same authority that approved the silent acquisition of 51% of this company's controlling interest. The words didn't land immediately. Then they did. Emily's breath caught. "That's not possible." Evelyn met her gaze. "It's already done." The room erupted, not in noise, but in movement. Papers shuffled. Phones vibrated. The lawyer's face drained of color. Jason stared at Evelyn. Disbelief giving way to calculation. "Who are you?" Evelyn considered the question. "I'm a shareholder," she said, "and I'm Noah Roberts' mother." Every eye turned toward Noah. For a moment, no one spoke. Emily looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, her expression fractured by shock. And something else, fear perhaps, or regret too late to matter. Jason laughed once sharply. "This is a joke." Evelyn didn't smile. "You can verify it with your counsel," she said, "or with the regulators once they review the filings I've submitted." She turned to Noah, then her voice softening. "You don't need to sign anything today." Noah nodded, heart steady. Jason's tone shifted defensive. "If you think this is revenge," "It isn't," Evelyn said. "It's correction." The meeting adjourned shortly after, not by declaration, but by collapse. People gathered their things in silence, eyes avoiding one another. Jason left without another word. Emily remained seated, frozen. Noah stood gathering his coat. As he passed Emily, she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" He paused. "You didn't ask." Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. Noah inhaled deeply, aware that something irreversible had just occurred. Inside the building, reputations were unraveling. Structures were being questioned. Control was shifting. And the woman they had dismissed as irrelevant had rewritten the room without raising her voice. As you sit with this moment, ask yourself, when humiliation turns public, is it cruelty or the consequence of believing you were untouchable? The divorce papers arrived 3 days later. They were delivered by courier, not out of courtesy, but control, thick immaculate, already annotated with sticky tabs and legal jargon designed to overwhelm. Noah Roberts recognized the tactic immediately. Speed, pressure, the illusion of inevitability. Emily didn't warn him they were coming. He found the envelope waiting on the kitchen counter when he returned home from work, placed deliberately beside his keys. The message was clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was a maneuver. Noah didn't open it right away. He washed his hands, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the table. Only then did he slide a finger beneath the seal and begin to read. The filing was aggressive. It framed Emily as the primary financial driver of the marriage, Noah as a dependent beneficiary of her ambition. It cited restructuring decisions as evidence of her foresight, his consent as proof of his irrelevance. There were proposed timelines, asset divisions, and a request for expedited proceedings. Noah read every page without interruption. What struck him wasn't the hostility, it was the confidence. The documents assumed compliance. They assumed that silence meant surrender. Emily arrived home an hour later, moving quickly, phone pressed to her ear. She stopped short when she saw the envelope open on the table. "I didn't want it to be like this," she said after ending the call, her tone carefully neutral. Noah looked up. "But this is how you chose," Emily exhaled. "This is business. The sooner it's resolved, the better for both of us." "For you," Noah replied calmly. She bristled. "I've offered you a fair settlement." Noah tapped the document. "You've offered me a narrative." Emily crossed her arms. "You don't have leverage here." He met her gaze. "You're confusing quiet with powerless." Emily's jaw tightened. "Jason's legal team is handling this. They're very thorough." Noah nodded once. "I'm sure they are." That night, Emily slept in the guest room. Noah didn't follow. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He called Daniel Brooks. Daniel listened without interruption as Noah summarized the filing. When Noah finished, there was a pause on the line, brief, deliberate. "They moved faster than expected," Daniel said. "But that's fine. "You've seen this before?" Noah asked. "More times than I can count," Daniel replied. "When people believe they're winning, they rush to lock the outcome. And when they're not," Noah asked, "they try to redefine fairness." Daniel explained the next steps, not in detail, but in sequence. Noah wouldn't respond immediately. There would be no counterfiling yet. "Silence used correctly could be disarming. They're expecting resistance," Daniel said. "What they're not prepared for is patience." The words settled into Noah's chest like an anchor. The following days were a study in escalation. Emily's demeanor hardened. Where she had once maintained the appearance of civility, she now spoke to Noah only through emails copied to legal counsel. Household logistics became itemized disputes. Even shared memories were weaponized, reframed as evidence of imbalance of dependency. Jason's influence was unmistakable. Noah saw it in the phrasing of Emily's messages, the confidence with which she dismissed compromise. This wasn't about separation. It was about positioning, establishing dominance, and early creating a precedent that would favor her long term. What Emily didn't realize was that Noah was no longer engaging on her terms. He moved through his days with deliberate calm, documenting communications, organizing timelines, preserving facts without interpretation. He didn't react to provocation. He didn't defend himself emotionally. When Emily accused him of stalling, he didn't deny it. "I'm being careful," he said. She laughed without humor. "Careful people get left behind." Noah didn't respond. Behind the scenes, Evelyn Roberts was already several steps ahead. She met with Daniel Brooks twice that week, reviewing filings, not just from the divorce, but from the company's internal governance. The overlap was subtle, but significant. Emily's personal strategy mirrored her professional one. Aggressive consolidation minimized disclosure reliance on momentum. Evelyn saw the patterns clearly. "They're trying to force a narrative of inevitability," Daniel said. "If we disrupt that, we don't disrupt it," Evelyn replied. "We let it mature." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You want to give them time, I want them to commit," Evelyn said. "Fully?" Meanwhile, Noah received another email from Emily's legal team, this one requesting immediate mediation. The tone had shifted slightly, urgency creeping in around the edges. Noah forwarded it to Daniel without comment. Daniel replied with a single sentence: "We'll respond when the ground stops moving." That weekend, Noah moved out. Not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. He packed only what he needed, closed documents, a few personal items. He left the rest untouched. When Emily asked if this was his way of giving up, he answered honestly. "No," he said. "It's my way of staying intact." He stayed in a short-term apartment near his office, quiet and sparse. The absence of tension felt unfamiliar at first, then clarifying. Without the constant pressure to justify himself, Noah's thoughts sharpened. He began to see the marriage not as a failure, but as a system that had outgrown its ethical boundaries. Emily's calls became less frequent, replaced by messages from lawyers. Jason's name appeared increasingly in professional contexts, his role expanding beyond CEO into informal strategist of Emily's personal affairs. That was the mistake, because the more Jason inserted himself, the more traceable his influence became. Daniel flagged it immediately. "They're blurring lines," he told Noah. "Professional counsel shouldn't be directing personal litigation strategy, especially when conflicts of interest are involved." Noah absorbed the implication. "So they're exposing themselves." "Yes," Daniel said. "And they don't know it yet." The turning point came during a preliminary hearing. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no declarations. Emily's counsel presented their case confidently, citing her leadership, her earnings, her strategic foresight. Noah listened, without expression, hands folded, posture relaxed. When it was Daniel's turn, he stood and asked a single question. "Can the court confirm whether Mr. Jason Miller has provided advisory input regarding the division of marital assets?" The room shifted. Emily's attorney hesitated. "Mr. Miller is not a party to this case." Daniel nodded. "Correct, which is why his involvement in asset strategy, if confirmed, raises questions. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Emily's attorney glanced at her. Emily said nothing. The silence spoke. The hearing was adjourned shortly after with instructions for further disclosure. Outside the courtroom, Emily confronted Noah. "You're trying to embarrass me," she hissed. "No," Noah replied evenly. "I'm letting the truth breathe." Her eyes flashed. "You think your mother can protect you from this?" Noah paused. "I think my mother taught me not to mistake speed for safety." Emily turned away, phone already in hand. That evening, Noah sat alone in his apartment, the city humming faintly beyond the window. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only clarity. The divorce had become what it always was. Beneath the surface, a financial weapon wielded by people who believed control equaled victory. They were about to learn the cost of that belief. As you reflect on Noah's restraint, consider this: when conflict becomes transactional, is walking away weakness or the first move toward reclaiming agency? Noah Roberts didn't learn the truth all at once. It came in fragments, carefully released, deliberately paced, like someone adjusting a lens until the picture finally came into focus. He suspected that if Evelyn had revealed everything at once, it would have overwhelmed him. Or worse, it might have tempted him to react instead of observe. So she let the structure Adenchabur reveal itself. They met on a Sunday afternoon, not in her house, but in a quiet office downtown that Noah had never seen before. The building wasn't marked with logos or names. It didn't need to be. Discretion, Noah was beginning to understand, was the signature of people who didn't require recognition. Evelyn arrived early, seated at a small conference table with a single folder and 2 cups of coffee. Noah noticed how little the space reflected her personality, neutral, almost forgettable. A place designed not to impress, but to disappear. "You're not here to be surprised," Evelyn said, as Noah sat down. "You're here to understand." He nodded. "I think I'm ready." She opened the folder not all the way, just enough to show structure without detail. Inside were charts. Not numbers, but relationships, ownership lines, influence maps, circles connected by thin, precise arrows. Noah recognized the logic immediately. This wasn't chaos. It was architecture. "I didn't build this to control companies," Evelyn said. "I built it to remove leverage from people who misuse it." Noah leaned closer. "How long longer than you've been alive?" she replied. "And longer than most of them assume anyone can stay patient." She pointed to one segment of the diagram. "This is the holding entity you saw." Noah traced it with his eyes. It branched outward, not aggressively, but decisively, touching advisory firms, minority stakes, quiet capital infusions. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious. But together, they formed something unmistakable. Influence without exposure. "They think they're being acquired by a silent partner," Noah said slowly. "Yes," Evelyn replied. "They think silence means absence." Noah sat back, the weight of it settling in. "And the company?" he asked. Evelyn closed the folder gently. "They're over-leveraged. Jason pushed growth faster than governance could support. He assumed that momentum would intimidate scrutiny." She met Noah's eyes. "That works until it doesn't." Noah thought of Emily, of her certainty, of the way she spoke as if outcomes were pre-written. "She believes she's on the winning side," he said. Evelyn nodded. "People often confuse alignment with protection." She didn't say Emily's name. She didn't need to. Over the next week, Noah learned more, not numbers, not balances, but philosophy. Evelyn explained how she evaluated risk, how she watched for ethical drift long before it became illegal. She described situations she had walked away from, opportunities she had declined because they required the wrong kind of compromise. "You taught me to be careful," Noah said once. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I taught you to be observant. Carefulness is what people call it when they don't see the pattern yet." Meanwhile, Emily and Jason accelerated. They interpreted the boardroom incident not as a warning, but as a temporary disruption. Jason framed it as an overreach that could be neutralized with pressure. Emily echoed his confidence, repeating his reassurances as if they were facts. Once this acquisition closes, she told a colleague, everything stabilizes. What she didn't understand was that the acquisition was already redefining her position not in her favor. Evelyn didn't intervene publicly. She let the company continue its trajectory, let Jason commit to decisions that narrowed his options. Every rushed signature, every optimistic projection tightened the framework around him. Daniel Brooks tracked it all. They're consolidating power internally, he told Evelyn during one of their briefings. Jason's sidelining dissent, Emily's signing off without full disclosure. Evelyn nodded. They're mistaking control for insulation. And Noah, Daniel asked. He's staying out of sight, Evelyn said. Exactly where he needs to be. That was the hardest part for Noah. Staying invisible went against every instinct he had developed as a professional. He wanted to fix things, to intervene, to point out structural flaws before damage occurred. But this wasn't an operational failure. It was a moral one. And moral failures require exposure, not correction. Noah focused on himself instead. He revisited old friendships that had been neglected during his marriage. He spent evenings reading, thinking, recalibrating his own sense of direction. For the first time in years, his thoughts weren't shaped by anticipation of someone else's reaction. He felt lighter, clearer. Emily noticed the change and misinterpreted it. You seem detached, she said during one of their few direct conversations. Like you've already checked out. Noah considered the words. I've checked in, he replied. Just not where you expect. She scoffed. You think this ends well for you? Noah didn't answer, because he was beginning to understand that ending well had nothing to do with winning. The pressure mounted quickly after that. Regulatory inquiries routine at first began asking sharper questions. Jason dismissed them publicly, framing them as due diligence noise. Privately, he grew tense. His meetings ran longer. His tone sharpened. Emily absorbed that tension and redirected it outward. This is your fault, she accused Noah in a rare moment of candor. If you hadn't dragged this out, Noah stopped her. This didn't start with me. She looked away. That was the moment Noah understood something essential. Emily wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing position. And that fear was now being tested. Evelyn watched it all unfold with measured distance. They're reaching the phase where confidence outruns caution, she told Daniel. That's when people make irreversible choices. Are we close? Daniel asked. Yes, Evelyn replied. But not yet. She instructed Daniel to prepare documentation, not for action, but for readiness. Filings that could be activated instantly. Notices that could be released without warning. The goal, she said, is not to humiliate. Daniel looked at her. Then what is it to restore proportion, Evelyn said. To remind them that power has consequences when it forgets responsibility. Noah absorbed those words deeply. He realized then that his mother's wealth, whatever its scale, wasn't the story. It was the discipline behind it, the refusal to confuse capability with entitlement. That realization reshaped how he saw everything that had happened. The marriage hadn't failed because Emily was ambitious. It failed because ambition had replaced ethics without acknowledgement. Because success had been allowed to excuse betrayal. And now, that substitution was being corrected. Late one night, Noah stood on his balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. He thought about the man he had been quiet, accommodating patient to the point of self-erasure. He was still patient, but he was no longer invisible. Somewhere across town, Jason Miller was signing documents he didn't fully understand. Emily was aligning herself with decisions that would soon redefine her identity. And Evelyn Roberts was finalizing a sequence that would not announce itself with noise, but with permanence. As you reflect on this stage of the story, consider this. When power is built in silence, is it more dangerous or simply more honest? The celebration was held on a rooftop downtown, high above the city, where glass railings and curated lighting created the illusion of inevitability. Emily Roberts arrived with Jason Miller at her side, dressed in confidence that bordered on relief. The past weeks had been tense questions from regulators' delays that irritated Jason, legal skirmishes that refused to resolve on schedule, but tonight was meant to erase all of that. Tonight was proof that momentum still belonged to them. They had invited the right people: investors, advisors, executives who measured truth by proximity to power. Champagne moved easily from tray to hand. Laughter landed on cue. Emily stood near the edge city lights, reflecting in her glass, listening as Jason outlined the next phase with casual authority. Once the ownership transition is finalized, he said, we'll streamline decision-making. No more bottlenecks. Emily nodded, echoing his certainty. The company will finally move at the speed it deserves. Someone congratulated her. Another called her visionary. The words settled comfortably, reinforcing the narrative she had chosen, that alignment with Jason was not betrayal, but evolution. What Emily didn't see was how the room subtly shifted when certain names were mentioned. A few attendees exchanged glances when Jason referenced the silent partner. Some smiled too quickly. Others asked questions that sounded supportive but carried a sharper edge. Have you met them? One investor asked lightly. Jason waved a hand. They're hands off. That's the beauty of it. Emily smiled, relieved. Hands off meant freedom. It meant protection. Across town, Noah Roberts watched none of this. He spent the evening alone in his apartment, reviewing a short list Daniel Brooks had sent earlier that day. It wasn't a brief. It wasn't advice. It was a sequence of events already in motion, dates approaching convergence. Noah read it once, then set it aside. He didn't need to understand every detail. What mattered was the direction. His phone buzzed. A message from Emily. We're finalizing things. I hope you're okay. The sentence looked compassionate. It wasn't. Noah typed a response, then deleted it. He placed the phone face down and stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool, steady. It reminded him that distance could be grounding. Back on the rooftop, the music grew louder. Jason raised his glass for a toast. To the future, he said. To bold decisions. Applause followed. Emily lifted her glass, smiling wide enough to convince herself, but beneath the celebration, cracks were forming. Jason's phone vibrated repeatedly. He ignored it at first, unwilling to interrupt the performance. When it continued, he excused himself and stepped aside. The call was from legal. They're asking for clarification on the advisory structure, the voice said. Specifically, your involvement in Emily's personal asset strategy. Jason frowned. That's irrelevant. They don't think so, the lawyer replied. And there's something else. Jason listened, his expression tightening. What do you mean, reviewed the filings? He asked. By who? There was a pause. By the majority shareholders' council. Jason ended the call and stood still, the noise of the party fading around him. He scanned the crowd, as if the answer might be standing nearby. Emily approached, sensing the shift. What is it? Nothing, Jason said quickly. Just due diligence noise. But his eyes didn't meet hers. The following morning, the tone changed. Emails arrived early, requests for meetings, clarifications, disclosures that hadn't been required before. Jason dismissed them publicly, telling the team to stay focused. Privately, he began making calls that didn't return promptly. Emily noticed the tension. Is this about the shareholders, she asked. Jason nodded. They're being more present than expected. That's not a problem, Emily said, trying to sound confident. They bought in for growth. Jason didn't respond. Later that day, a memo circulated internally announcing an upcoming board meeting. Mandatory attendance, agenda to follow. Emily felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The narrative had been clear: acquisition, consolidation, acceleration. She called Noah. He answered on the second ring. They're calling a board meeting, she said without greeting. Do you know anything about that? Noah paused. No, he replied. But I'm not surprised. Her voice sharpened. You're enjoying this. No, Noah said evenly. I'm respecting it. Emily scoffed. You think this ends with you on top? Noah considered the question. I don't think in those terms anymore. She hung up. Across town, Evelyn Roberts reviewed the same board notice with calm focus. She didn't attend the celebration. She hadn't needed to. She had already seen this pattern before confidence peaking just before exposure. Daniel Brooks joined her later that afternoon. "They're asking the wrong questions," he said. "And they're asking them too late." Evelyn nodded. They assumed the room belonged to them. Daniel hesitated. "Once this moves forward, there's no reversing it." "That's the point," Evelyn replied. "Correction only works when it's final." The board meeting arrived sooner than Emily expected. Jason entered with his usual confidence, but it felt thinner now, strained by the weight of unresolved inquiries. Emily followed posture, perfect expression controlled. They took their seats, the room filled. Counsel, advisors, directors who had suddenly become cautious. And then at the end of the table, the final chair was occupied. Evelyn Roberts sat there, quietly reviewing a document. Emily's breath caught. "What is she doing here?" she whispered. Jason said nothing. The chairperson cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, "there's been a change to the agenda." Evelyn looked up. "We'll start with ownership clarification," the chairperson continued. "Specifically the scope and intent of the majority stake." The words settled heavily. Emily felt the room tilt. Jason leaned forward. "This is unnecessary," Evelyn spoke calmly. "It's overdue." She placed a single document on the table. Not a stack, not a presentation, just one page. "This outlines the conditions under which the acquisition was finalized," she said, "and the obligations that come with it." A lawyer reached for the page, eyes scanning quickly. Jason's confidence collapsed into calculation. "You didn't disclose this." "I did," Evelyn replied. "You didn't read it." Silence followed. Emily felt something crack, not just in the room, but in herself. The certainty she had borrowed from Jason evaporated, leaving her exposed. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Evelyn met her gaze. "It means alignment without accountability is not protection." The meeting continued, but Emily barely heard it. Terms were discussed, oversight expanded, authority redistributed. By the time it ended, nothing looked the way it had that morning. Outside, Emily confronted Jason. "You said this was under control," she said. Jason didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice lacked its usual edge. "They moved differently than I expected." Emily laughed once sharply. "So did I." That evening, Emily sat alone in her apartment, the city suddenly feeling distant. She replayed the choices she had framed as strategic, the silences she had justified, the loyalty she had dismissed. For the first time, she wondered whether she had mistaken proximity to power for power itself. Noah received a single message that night from Daniel. "They've committed." Noah closed his phone and sat quietly. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt resolved. Because now the celebration was over, and what followed wouldn't be loud, but it would be lasting. As you reflect on this moment, ask yourself when confidence becomes celebration. Is it proof of success, or the last distraction before consequence arrives? The room did not erupt when Evelyn Roberts took control of the meeting. It didn't need to. Power rarely announced itself with noise. It settled in, rearranged the air, and waited for everyone else to catch up. Emily sat rigid in her chair, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles ached. Jason Miller, for the first time since she had known him, did not look like the center of gravity. His posture remained upright, his suit immaculate, but his attention flicked too often to the legal counsel, seated near Evelyn. He was calculating now, not commanding. The chairperson cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Roberts has requested the floor." Evelyn nodded once, then spoke in a tone so even it felt almost gentle. "I won't take much of your time," she said. "I prefer clarity over performance." She slid a slim folder across the table, not toward Jason, not toward Emily, toward the board as a whole. "This company has grown quickly," she continued. "Growth is not a crime, but when growth outpaces governance, responsibility doesn't disappear. It concentrates." Emily felt her throat tighten. This was not how she had imagined it. There were no accusations yet, no raised voices. Just a calm dismantling of assumptions she had built her confidence on. Jason leaned forward. With respect, the operational structure has already been reviewed. There's no cause for alarm. Evelyn turned her gaze to him. I agree, she said. Alarm is unnecessary. Documentation is sufficient. She nodded toward the legal counsel. You'll find that certain advisory roles have exceeded their ethical boundaries, not illegally yet, but in ways that compromise independence. The word yet hung in the air. A murmur rippled through the room, subtle but unmistakable. Emily's pulse quickened. She glanced at Jason, searching for reassurance. He didn't look back. The counsel spoke carefully. Mrs. Roberts, are you suggesting misconduct? I'm suggesting exposure, Evelyn replied. Misconduct requires intent. Exposure requires evidence. She paused, letting the distinction land. Emily felt a wave of heat rise to her face. She understood then that this wasn't a confrontation meant to humiliate. It was worse. It was an audit of choices of character, of alignment. Jason attempted to reassert control. If this is about advisory overlap, it can be addressed internally. It already has been, Evelyn said. By me. The chairperson leaned forward. To be clear, he said, you're confirming that your entity holds a controlling interest. Yes, Evelyn replied. And that interest comes with obligations I intend to fulfill. The meeting shifted gears after that. Oversight committees were discussed. Independent reviews initiated. Certain decisions, Jason's decisions, were suspended, pending evaluation. The words were polite. The implications were not. Emily listened, stunned, as authority redistributed itself around the table. Her name was mentioned less frequently. Jason's was mentioned with caution. At one point, Emily spoke without planning to. You're dismantling everything we built, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Evelyn looked at her not unkindly. No, she said. I'm preserving what still has value. Emily swallowed. You don't understand what it took to get here. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. I understand very well, she replied, which is why I know what it costs to stay. That was the moment Emily felt something inside her fracture. She had told herself this was about ambition, about growth, about escaping the limitations of a life she had outgrown. But listening to Evelyn, calm, precise, uninterested in applause, Emily realized how much of her certainty had been borrowed. Borrowed from Jason's confidence, borrowed from momentum, borrowed from the belief that proximity to power would protect her from consequence. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. People gathered their materials quietly. No one lingered. There were no congratulations, no reassurances, just a collective understanding that the landscape had changed. Outside the boardroom, Jason finally spoke. This isn't over, he said, a voice low. Evelyn met his gaze. No, she agreed. It's clarified. Emily stood between them, suddenly aware of how isolated she was. Jason turned to her, his expression unreadable. We'll talk later, he said. Then he walked away. Emily didn't follow. She stood there for several seconds, staring at the closed door, before turning to Evelyn. Was this necessary, she asked, quietly. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. That depends, she said, on whether you still believe control and worth are the same thing. Emily felt tears threaten, unexpected and unwelcome. You bought the company, she said. You could have taken everything. Evelyn nodded. I could have. But then I'd be proving your point instead of correcting it. Emily looked down, and Evelyn's voice softened. Noah was never the problem. The words landed with quiet finality. That evening, Noah Roberts sat across from Daniel Brooks in the same unmarked office where clarity had first begun to take shape. It's done, Daniel said. They're implementing oversight immediately. Jason's authority is constrained. Emily's position is under review. Noah nodded, absorbing the information without visible reaction. And you, Daniel asked. How are you feeling? Noah considered the question carefully. I feel lighter, he said finally. Not because they're losing, because I'm no longer carrying what wasn't mine to begin with. Daniel smiled faintly. Your mother asked me to tell you something. Noah looked up. She said, "You're free to speak now," Daniel continued, "or remain silent. Either way, the outcome won't depend on you." Noah leaned back, exhaling slowly. For months, he had been bracing himself, anticipating confrontation, preparing for defense. Now he realized there was nothing left to prove. Later that night, Emily called him. He hesitated before answering. "I didn't know," she said as soon as he picked up. Her voice sounded smaller, stripped of the confidence that had once filled it. "About your mother? About any of this?" "I know," Noah replied. "Jason didn't tell me everything," she continued quickly. "He framed it as strategy, as protection." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Protection isn't something you outsource," he said gently, "especially not at the cost of trust." Emily's breath hitched. "Are you happy about this?" Noah thought about the question. "I'm not happy that it came to this," he said, "but I'm at peace with where it landed." They sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them. "I don't know who I am without all of this," Emily admitted. Noah's voice remained calm. "That's something only you can answer." When the call ended, Noah set his phone down and stood by the window, watching the city settle into night. He felt no urge to celebrate, no desire to explain. Justice, he was learning, didn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it felt like quiet alignment, like the world finally acknowledging what you had known all along. And somewhere across the city, a woman who had mistaken momentum for safety was beginning to understand the cost of that confusion. As you reflect on this turning point, consider this: when power is rebalanced without spectacle, does it feel less real or more permanent? The consequences didn't arrive with sirens or headlines. They arrived with emails. Jason Miller read the first one just after dawn, the glow of his phone illuminating the sharp angles of his face as he stood in his kitchen, coffee untouched beside him. The subject line was neutral, almost polite. Request for cooperation, independent review. He scrolled quickly, jaw tightening with each paragraph. The language was careful, legal, irreversible. This wasn't an inquiry he could manage with charm or urgency. It named specific transactions, specific advisory overlaps, specific decisions that had been framed as strategic, but now sat under a different light. Exposure. By mid-morning, 3 more emails followed. Then a call he didn't answer. Then another. Jason dressed anyway out of habit more than confidence and drove to the office, telling himself that this was still salvageable. That influence, once established, could always be reasserted. The building felt different when he arrived. Conversations stopped as he passed. Doors closed a little faster. People who once sought his approval now avoided eye contact. At 10 sharp, legal counsel convened an emergency meeting. The room was smaller than the boardroom, deliberately so. Jason took his seat, scanning faces for allies. He found none. "We need to discuss your role," the lead counsel began. "Specifically, the extent of your involvement in personal asset advisory related to Miss Roberts." Jason leaned back. "I advised when asked." "That's not a crime." "No," the counsel agreed. "But it is a conflict." Jason laughed, once sharp and dismissive. "Only if someone wants to make it one." The counsel didn't respond immediately. He slid a document across the table. "This outlines communications between you and Miss Roberts regarding asset positioning during a pending acquisition," he said. "Some of these occurred while you were acting in a fiduciary capacity." Jason's confidence wavered. "That's being taken out of context," he said. "Context," the counsel replied evenly, "is exactly what we're establishing." By the time Jason left the meeting, his authority had been suspended pending review. Not removed yet, but contained. He was advised not to contact certain parties, not to access specific systems, to wait. Jason Miller had never waited for anything in his life. Across town, Emily Roberts stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. She had spent the morning answering emails from HR and compliance requests, framed as procedural but heavy with implication. Meetings postponed. Decisions reversed. Her calendar, once crowded with momentum, now looked strangely empty. She felt unmoored. For the first time in years, there was no script to follow. At noon, she was called into a private meeting with 2 board members and an external consultant. The tone was courteous, almost kind. "We're conducting a review," one of them said. "This is standard under the circumstances." Emily nodded, hands folded tightly. "I understand." The consultant spoke next. "Your role isn't under accusation," she said carefully, "but it is under evaluation." "Evaluation?" Emily swallowed. "Am I being removed?" "No," the consultant replied. "But certain privileges will be suspended during the review." The words landed softly and cut deeply. After the meeting, Emily sat alone in her car, the engine running, the radio silent. She thought about how quickly things had turned, how easily confidence had dissolved once momentum was interrupted. She thought about Noah, not as the man she had dismissed, but as the one constant she had pushed away while chasing alignment with power she didn't truly understand. Meanwhile, Noah Roberts moved through his days with a steadiness that surprised even him. He returned to work not with ambition, but with presence. Colleagues who had once kept their distance now approached him quietly, offering updates, asking questions. They spoke to him differently, as if recalibrating their understanding of where he stood. Noah didn't correct them. He didn't need to. One afternoon, Daniel Brooks called him. "The review is expanding," Daniel said. "Jason's communications are raising concerns. There's talk of formal action." Noah closed his eyes briefly. "What about Emily?" "She's cooperating," Daniel replied, "which helps her. But cooperation doesn't erase decisions." Noah nodded slowly. "I don't want her destroyed." Daniel paused. "Justice doesn't destroy," he said. "It clarifies." That evening, Noah met Evelyn for dinner, not at her house, not in an office, but at a small, unremarkable restaurant neither of them had been to before. They ate quietly at first. "You're doing well," Evelyn said eventually. Noah smiled faintly. "I don't feel like I'm doing anything." "That's because you're no longer compensating," she replied. "You're just standing where you belong." He considered that. "Did you ever worry I'd resent you?" he asked. "For not telling me sooner," Evelyn looked at him carefully. "I worried you'd doubt yourself if I did," she said. "Strength borrowed too early becomes dependency." Noah nodded. He understood now. Across the city, Jason Miller's situation worsened. A formal notice arrived the next day. Regulatory bodies were opening inquiries, not because of the acquisition itself, but because of the blurred lines it had exposed. Jason's communications were being reviewed. His authority remained frozen. He called Emily. She answered after the third ring. "This is getting out of hand," Jason said. "Your mother-in-law orchestrated this." Emily closed her eyes. "No," she said quietly. She revealed it. Jason scoffed. "You're siding with them, now I'm siding with reality," Emily replied. There was silence on the line. "You used me," Jason said finally. Emily's voice was tired. "You taught me to believe that." She ended the call. That night, Emily sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the markers of a life she had believed was secure. Awards, photographs, symbols of momentum. They felt hollow now. She opened a drawer and found an old photo, one she hadn't seen in years. It was of her and Noah early in their marriage, sitting on the floor of their first apartment, laughing over takeout containers. She stared at it for a long time. Noah, meanwhile, received an unexpected email from HR. "Position update, internal operations." He opened it slowly. The message outlined a new role. Not a promotion in title, not a public elevation, but expanded authority over internal systems and oversight. A role aligned with his strengths. A role that mattered. Noah closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. It wasn't a reward. It was recognition. Later that evening, Emily called again. "I don't know how to undo this," she said. Noah listened. "You don't undo it," he replied gently. "You understand it." "Do you hate me?" she asked, voice breaking. Noah paused. "No," he said honestly. "But I can't protect you from the truth." They sat in silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted, not just between them, but within them. The review would continue. Outcomes would follow. Careers would change. But one thing was already clear. The story was no longer about betrayal. It was about accountability and the quiet, permanent way it reorders lives when no one is watching. As you reflect on this chapter, ask yourself, when the truth removes illusion instead of punishing outright, is that mercy or the most precise form of justice? The first thing Emily Roberts lost was not her job. It was certainty. It crept away quietly without announcement, leaving behind a hollow space she didn't know how to fill. The review moved forward with methodical precision, no accusations, no dramatics, just a steady stripping away of assumptions she had built her identity on. Her access was limited first. Certain systems required secondary approval. Meetings she once led were reassigned temporarily. Invitations stopped arriving without explanation. No one was cruel. That somehow made it worse. At work, people spoke to her carefully now, as if navigating around something fragile. The respect she had once taken for granted had transformed into politeness, and politeness, she was learning, was not the same thing. At home, the silence was heavier. Emily spent her evenings pacing an apartment that no longer felt like a reward. The decor she had chosen to signal success now felt performative, like a stage set after the audience had left. She slept poorly, waking in the early hours with thoughts that refused to organize themselves. She thought often about the boardroom, the way Evelyn had spoken without raising her voice, the way the room had rearranged itself around her words. There had been no gloating, no satisfaction, just alignment. Emily had always believed that power announced itself. She was discovering how wrong that assumption had been. Jason Miller's unraveling was louder. His suspension became indefinite. Advisory privileges revoked. Meetings canceled. He tried to regain control through calls and messages that grew more urgent by the day. When those failed, he shifted tactics, blame deflection narrative. He told anyone who would listen that the acquisition had been a trap. That Evelyn had orchestrated everything to punish him. That Emily had been collateral damage. Emily listened once. Then she stopped answering. The moment that crystallized everything came during a compliance interview. Emily sat across from two external reviewers, hands folded, posture composed out of habit rather than confidence. They asked about timelines, about decisions, about her awareness of Jason's dual roles. She answered honestly. "I trusted him," she said at one point. "I believed alignment meant protection." One of the reviewers nodded, not unsympathetically. "It's a common assumption." Emily swallowed. "Is it naive?" The reviewer met her gaze. "It's human, but leadership requires verification." That sentence followed Emily home like an echo. Across the city, Noah Roberts felt the consequences in a different way. He walked through his days without the familiar weight of anticipation. There were no incoming demands, no need to brace himself emotionally. The absence of tension felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. He noticed small changes. Colleagues sought his input again, not because of proximity to power, but because his insights had always been useful. His expanded role brought responsibility, but not spectacle. He found himself solving problems quietly, the way he always had, only now without resistance. One afternoon, as Noah reviewed system protocols, he realized something that startled him. He wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal had lost its charge, not because it had been forgiven, but because it had been understood. Emily's choices no longer felt personal. They felt symptomatic. That realization freed him in a way he hadn't expected. Evelyn noticed the change the next time they spoke. "You're lighter," she said. "I stopped carrying explanations that weren't mine to give," Noah replied. She nodded. That's usually the turning point. Emily reached that point more slowly. The board's evaluation concluded with measured outcomes. She wasn't terminated. She wasn't publicly disgraced. But she was removed from strategic decision-making indefinitely. Her role was redefined, narrower, supervised, stripped of the autonomy she had once equated with worth. When the notice arrived, Emily read it twice, then set it down carefully. She felt embarrassed, not because others would know, but because she did. For the first time, she saw her ambition without the narrative she had wrapped around it. Saw how easily it had justified choices she once would have questioned. That evening, she called Noah. He answered without hesitation. "I don't know who I am right now," she said quietly. Noah listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't reassure. "I thought success would stabilize everything," Emily continued. "That once I had enough leverage, I wouldn't feel so afraid." Noah exhaled slowly. "Leverage doesn't remove fear," he said. "It just postpones it." She was silent for a long moment. "I lost myself," she admitted. "No." Noah replied gently. "You set yourself aside. There's a difference." Emily felt tears rise. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just honest. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just didn't want you to think none of it mattered." Noah considered his words carefully. "It mattered," he said. "That's why it changed us." They didn't speak again that night. Jason, meanwhile, reached the end of his momentum. A formal inquiry was opened. Not sensational, not public, but thorough. His influence contracted rapidly. Allies distanced themselves. The confidence that had once insulated him now isolated him. He sent Emily a final message. "We could have won." Emily didn't reply. She understood now that what he called winning was simply taking until there was nothing left to support the weight. Weeks passed. Emily began therapy not because it was required, but because she needed a space where outcomes weren't measured by performance. She confronted parts of herself she had ignored: the fear of being ordinary, the belief that worth required acceleration, the habit of outsourcing validation. It was uncomfortable, necessary. Noah continued building a life that didn't require justification. He reconnected with old interests, spent time with people who knew him before the erosion began. He learned to sit in quiet without waiting for the next disruption. One evening, he met Emily for coffee. Not to reconcile, not to negotiate, just to close something properly. They sat across from each other in a small cafe, the air neutral, the stakes low. "I don't want to be enemies," Emily said. "We don't have to be," Noah replied. She nodded. "I'm sorry," she said, not performatively, not strategically, just honestly. Noah accepted it without ceremony. "I know," he said. They parted without promises. Later that night, Emily returned to her apartment and packed away the symbols of the life she had been chasing. Not to erase it, but to make room for something quieter. She didn't know yet what that would be. Noah stood on his balcony again, city lights stretching outward, and felt something settle into place. Not triumph, not revenge. Balance. The cost of contempt, he realized, wasn't punishment. It was the slow, irreversible loss of alignment between who you were, who you became, and who you had to face when the noise stopped. As you reflect on this chapter, ask yourself when ambition costs you. Your center is the price paid all at once, or over a lifetime of quiet corrections. Noah Roberts did not feel victorious. If anything, what settled over him in the weeks that followed felt closer to sobriety than triumph. A clear-headed awareness of where he stood and where he no longer wished to return. The noise had faded. The urgency that once shaped his days had dissolved. What remained was choice. And choice, he was learning, carried its own weight. Emily asked to meet him again after the compliance review formally concluded. Not through lawyers this time, not through intermediaries. She sent a short message, unadorned and careful. Coffee, neutral place, no expectations. Noah agreed. They met on a quiet weekday afternoon at a cafe neither of them had been to before. No shared memories, no emotional residue in the walls. It felt appropriate. Emily arrived first, seated near the window, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. When Noah walked in, she looked up and stood instinctively, then stopped herself, unsure. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Noah replied. They sat. For a few moments, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was deliberate, like both of them were checking the ground before stepping forward. "I won't take much of your time," Emily began. "I know you don't owe me that." Noah nodded. I'm listening. She took a breath. I wanted to say this without explanations, without strategy. He waited. I made choices that hurt you, she said. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to face how afraid I was of becoming irrelevant. The honesty startled her as much as it surprised him. Noah studied her carefully. She looked different, not diminished, but stripped of performance. The confidence she once wore, like armor, was gone, replaced by something quiet and more uncertain. I convinced myself that speed was strength, Emily continued. That if I moved fast enough, I wouldn't have to sit with doubt. With stillness, she paused. You were still, and I mistook that for weakness. Noah felt the words land, not as an accusation, but as a recognition long overdue. I didn't need you to move faster, he said calmly. I needed you to stay present. Emily nodded. I see that now. She hesitated, then spoke again. Jason made it easy to believe that alignment was safety. That if I stayed close to power, I'd never be questioned. Noah's voice remained even. Power that can't be questioned isn't safety. It's a delay. Emily looked down at her hands. I lost myself trying to outrun that. Noah took a sip of his coffee, buying himself a moment. I don't hate you, he said finally. But I can't step back into something that required me to disappear. Emily's eyes glistened. I'm not asking you to. The admission felt like release. I needed to hear that, she added. Not because I hoped for reconciliation, but because I needed to understand the cost. Noah nodded. Understanding doesn't always come with repair. They sat quietly again, the hum of the cafe filling the space between them. I've been offered a different role, Noah said eventually. At work. Emily looked up. That's good. It is, he agreed. Because it fits who I am, not who I needed to become to be tolerated. Emily smiled faintly. You always knew who you were. Noah considered that. I forgot for a while. The conversation didn't last much longer after that. They spoke of logistics documents, timelines, the practical closure that followed emotional reckoning. When they stood to leave, there was no embrace, no dramatic farewell. Just a nod. Outside, Noah walked alone for several blocks, letting the city absorb the weight of what had been said. He felt no regret, no longing, just a quiet confirmation that the choice he was making, choosing himself, was the right one. Later that week, Evelyn invited him to dinner. They ate in her kitchen as they always had, the familiarity grounding. Afterwards, she poured tea and sat across from him, watching his face the way only a parent could. You met her, she said. Yes, Noah replied. And Evelyn asked. I chose clarity, he said simply. Evelyn smiled. That's usually the harder option. Noah hesitated. I want you to know something, he said. I never needed you to intervene for me. I know, Evelyn replied. That's why I did. He met her gaze. You let me decide. She nodded. Agency matters more than protection. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Over the following days, Noah formalized his decision. He declined any role that tied him to Emily's company directly or indirectly. He didn't want proximity to the fallout. He wanted separation, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the life he was building. Daniel Brooks reviewed the paperwork and raised an eyebrow. You're leaving value on the table. Noah smiled faintly. Only if you think value is a number. Daniel nodded. Fair point. Jason Miller attempted contact once more through a mutual acquaintance, then through a carefully worded message framed as reconciliation. Noah ignored both. Not out of spite, but because engagement would have suggested equivalence. There was none. The inquiry into Jason's conduct continued. Outcomes would follow in time. Noah didn't track them closely. His attention had shifted inward toward decisions that aligned with who he was becoming. He began mentoring junior colleagues, offering guidance without control. He volunteered on weekends working with organizations that valued infrastructure over optics. He rebuilt routines that centered steadiness rather than reaction. One evening, as he walked home after a long day, Noah realized something that would have startled him months earlier. He felt proud. not of having endured betrayal, not of being connected to power, but of having refused to become smaller to survive someone else's ambition. Emily, in her own way, reached a similar understanding. She sent Noah one final message weeks later. "I'm learning how to be still. Thank you for not punishing me for learning too late." Noah read it once, then archived it. He didn't reply. He didn't need to, because some boundaries are not statements, they're directions. And Noah Roberts had finally chosen his. As you sit with this chapter, ask yourself, when the chance to reclaim dignity appears, do you reach for it quietly or wait for someone else to grant it? Evelyn Roberts had never intended to teach her son about money, not directly. Money, she believed, was a language best learned through consequences rather than instruction. It revealed character more reliably than lectures ever could. So when Noah arrived for dinner that evening, quiet, centered, unhurried, she knew the time had come to explain what she had never named. They sat at the small table in her kitchen, the same one Noah had done homework at years ago. The familiarity grounded him. Evelyn noticed the way his shoulders no longer carried tension, the way his attention stayed present instead of scanning for danger. "You've changed," she said. "So have you," Nada replied gently. She smiled. "I've always been this way. You're just finally seeing it." After dinner, Evelyn stood and retrieved a thin, leather-bound folder from a drawer Noah didn't know existed. She placed it on the table, but didn't open it. "This isn't a disclosure," she said. "It's context." Noah nodded. "That's all I want." Evelyn took a breath. "When your father was alive, we made decisions together. Quiet ones. We avoided attention, because attention creates pressure, and pressure makes people sloppy." She paused. "After he died, I saw how quickly assumptions formed. People saw a widow and expected retreat. I gave them that impression." Noah listened, not interrupting. "I didn't build what I built to dominate." Evelyn continued. "I built it to opt out, to never be cornered by someone else's urgency." She opened the folder just enough for Noah to glimpse structures, entities, trusts, oversight frameworks. "Not numbers, relationships. I kept it invisible to you for a reason," she said. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to learn worth without leverage." Noah absorbed that slowly. "I needed to know you'd choose integrity, even when it cost you," Evelyn said. "Not because you had a safety net, but because you believed in it." Noah felt a tightness in his chest, not pain, but recognition. "You let me struggle," he said quietly. "I let you choose," she corrected. "There's a difference." They sat in silence for a moment. "I never wanted you to inherit power," Evelyn added. "Only clarity." Noah looked at her. "Then why tell me now? Because you've already proven you don't need it," she replied. "And because the role I'm about to offer isn't about money." Noah raised an eyebrow. "What role?" Evelyn folded her hands. "Oversight," she said. "Not control, not management. Accountability." She explained then slowly, carefully, how certain structures required a human conscience. Someone who understood systems, who respected process, who didn't confuse speed with progress. Someone who could say no without needing applause. "I don't want you to run anything," Evelyn said. "I want you to help prevent people like Jason from ever mistaking momentum for immunity again." Noah considered the offer deeply. "And if I say no?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "Then I'll know I raised you correctly." He exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "I'll help," he said, "but on one condition. Name it." "That it never becomes public," Noah replied. "No titles, no announcements." Evelyn nodded. That was always the plan. Across the city, Emily Roberts was learning a different lesson. Her days had slowed. The urgency that once drove her decisions had evaporated, leaving behind long stretches of quiet she didn't know how to fill. Therapy sessions forced her to confront patterns she had avoided, how she equated worth with acceleration, how she dismissed stillness as stagnation. She had stepped down from roles that required performative confidence, not as punishment, but as recalibration. The work she did now was narrower, less visible, and oddly more satisfying. For the first time, she felt the weight of her choices without the cushion of justification. Jason Miller's situation, meanwhile, continued to deteriorate. Formal findings emerged, not sensational, not publicized, but definitive. His influence contracted into irrelevance. Doors closed without explanation. Calls went unanswered. He had mistaken access for authority. Noah didn't follow the details. He didn't need to. What mattered was the lesson one he had learned, without spectacle. Weeks later, Noah attended a small, unmarked meeting in a building that didn't appear on directories. The room held no branding, no hierarchy, just people committed to restraint. Evelyn introduced him simply. "This is Noah." No titles followed. The discussion that unfolded was careful, precise. Systems, safeguards, how to detect ethical drift before it metastasized. Noah spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened not because of who he was connected to, but because his words carried proportion. Afterward, Evelyn walked with him to the elevator. "You did well," she said. Noah smiled faintly. "I didn't do much." "That's the point," she replied. That night, Noah returned home and stood on his balcony watching the city settle. He thought about the life he had nearly lost, not because of betrayal alone, but because he had once believed endurance was the same as virtue. He knew better now. Emily, too, stood alone that night, looking out over the same city from a different window. She felt no bitterness, only clarity. She understood now that power borrowed from proximity had always been conditional. Stillness, she was learning, was not absence. It was alignment. Evelyn closed her ledger late that evening, satisfied not with victory, but with balance. The systems would endure. The people involved would adjust or not. What mattered was that the lesson had landed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but completely. As you reflect on this chapter, consider this: when legacy is built without spectacle, is it less impressive or simply more honest? The quiet that followed felt earned. Not the hollow silence that comes after conflict, but the kind that settles when nothing is left unresolved. Noah Roberts noticed it first in the mornings. He woke without the familiar tension in his chest, without the instinct to brace himself for someone else's urgency. His days unfolded with intention rather than reaction. That, more than anything, told him the season had changed. His new role remained intentionally undefined. No title, no announcement. Just invitations measured deliberate to sit in rooms where decisions were being shaped long before they reached headlines. Noah spoke rarely, and when he did, it was to ask questions that slowed momentum rather than accelerated it. What happens if this fails quietly? Who absorbs the cost? If this succeeds loudly, who benefits if no one is watching? Those questions changed rooms. People adjusted their posture when he spoke, not because he demanded authority, but because he refused to perform. His presence recalibrated conversations, pulling them away from ego and back toward consequence. Evelyn watched from a distance, satisfied. "You found your pace," she said during one of their brief check-ins. "I stopped trying to keep up with someone else's," Noah replied. She smiled. That's when clarity arrives. Emily Roberts found clarity differently. Her life no longer revolved around forward motion. Without the constant chase, she was forced to sit with herself, an experience she had avoided for years. Therapy helped, not because it provided answers, but because it removed excuses. She learned how often she had equated worth with visibility, and how easily she had dismissed the people who offered stability instead of acceleration. She took a position that paid less and asked more. It didn't come with recognition. That she discovered was the point. One afternoon, she ran into Noah by chance at a bookstore. The encounter was unplanned, unguarded. They exchanged a brief greeting, nothing more. Later that evening, Emily wrote in her journal not about regret, but about responsibility. She understood now that betrayal wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was simply choosing ambition over presence again and again until trust eroded quietly. Jason Miller, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale told in muted tones. There were no dramatic fallouts, no public disgrace. just an absence. Invitations stopped coming. Advisory roles dried up. His name no longer carried weight. He had mistaken momentum for permanence. And permanence, it turned out, belonged to those who built slowly. Noah thought about that often as he walked through the city at night, observing the lives unfolding around him. People hurried past, chasing something urgent, something undefined. He no longer felt compelled to join them. He had learned the difference between movement and direction. The divorce finalized without spectacle. Documents signed. Assets divided cleanly. No bitterness, no last-minute maneuvers. When it was done, Noah felt no sense of loss, only completion. He met Daniel Brooks one final time to close the loop. "You walked away from a great deal," Daniel said, half amused. Noah smiled. "I walked toward myself." Daniel nodded. "That's rarer." Months passed. Noah rebuilt his routines with intention. He volunteered his time. He mentored quietly. He invested in relationships that didn't require negotiation. When people asked him what had changed, he struggled to answer. Everything and nothing. Evelyn remained what she had always been, present without intrusion, powerful without display. She never referenced what she controlled, only what she protected. Watching Noah live without resentment confirmed something she had long believed. Power given too early weakens. Power earned through restraint endures. On a crisp autumn evening, Noah stood once more on his balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. He felt no urge to explain his journey, no need to frame it as a victory. Justice, he had learned, didn't need witnesses. It arrived through alignment, when actions met consequences, when choices revealed their true cost, when dignity was reclaimed without asking permission. He thought briefly of Emily, of Jason, of the life he had nearly surrendered in the name of endurance. He felt no anger, only gratitude for the clarity that followed collapse. Some victories don't change the world. They change the person who walks through it. And that Noah understood now was enough. There is a quiet lie. Many of us are taught to believe that endurance is the same as virtue, and that staying silent long enough will eventually be rewarded. But this story reminds us of a harder truth. Dignity is not preserved by shrinking. It is preserved by alignment. Noah didn't win because he outplayed anyone. He won because he refused to become someone else to survive betrayal. He didn't chase power, expose secrets, or demand validation. He waited. He observed. And when the truth surfaced, he stood exactly where he needed to be. Emily's fall wasn't the loss of a career. It was the loss of an illusion. Jason's wasn't public disgrace. It was irrelevance. And Evelyn's strength was never her wealth, but her discipline. Knowing when to speak and when silence would do more work than force ever could. This is what real justice often looks like. Not dramatic, not loud, but permanent. If this story resonated with you, ask yourself, where have you been patient when you should have been aligned? Where have you mistaken stillness for weakness or speed for strength? Your answers matter. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others know where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you believe stories about dignity, restraint, and moral awakening deserve space, consider subscribing to the channel. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about winning. They're about refusing to lose yourself.